Hi, everybody. I'm George, and this is the best little horror house in Philly, the show where we talk about the best horror movie ever made, according to our guest, at least. And today we're going across the pond for the first time to talk to our first English guest, YouTuber extraordinaire and my pal Dan. TYTD Reviews is here. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, George. Thank you so much for having me on. It's very much appreciated.
Oh, absolutely my pleasure. I mean, you're one of the biggest horror fans that I know. We talk about it literally every day.
Yes, and never a day wasted with yourself.
And before we hopped on this conversation, we were just talking about how you were really excited that you had just found a new movie to talk about, and it was something like the likes of which you hadn't seen in like a decade. And I would tell us a little bit about your channel and like, I mean, that just seems like it must be so exciting to find something to talk about and really be able to bring light to it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, my channel is TYTD Reviews. We're on YouTube, and we also have a website where we sort of host extra bits, little extra reviews and blogs and things like that. We predominantly look at the films that time forgot, sort of forgotten, low budget, no budget, super cheap cinema. The films your video store clerk would warn you about, all that kind of just awful stuff. But we do occasionally sprinkle in the nice sort of cult gems here and there to try and break up the flow and get a bit of a palate cleanse. What I was talking about to you just before we started was that I'd saw a film last night that I hadn't seen anything quite like it in the last 10 years. It was just so over the top and ridiculous. And the main reason why it was so ludicrous is predominantly down to censorship, which is something I'm normally a massive advocate against. I'm always one of these people who's like, we need the uncut version, we need the director's cut version, we need to see it how it was originally intended. But this film I found, which was called Nutbag, which was released in 2000. In the US, it's got an uncut version that runs to about 80 minutes, and it's a very, very drab gore affair. It's a very long slog with a lot of extended murder sequences that are very unpleasant, and
right.
It's sort of a little bit misogynistic, and it's just a terrible, terrible film. But when it got sent to the UK, the BBFC, who are very, very strict against violence to women and sort of extreme violence, took one look at the film and just hacked it to pieces. They've just taken all of the violence and horror and gore out. So what you're left with is a low, no-budget shot-on-video film of a man pretending to be crazy really badly, just sort of wandering around at things and just preaching weird sort of semi-Bible verses. And he has a pet spider who he talks to, who sort of becomes his friend through all of it. But it's weird. It's kind of like, the best way to describe it is a Poundland Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, but with all of the stuff that made Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer good taken out and just replaced with like really half-arsed performances. I just sat there mesmerised because that's another thing as well. The US cut runs to 80 minutes. The UK cut runs to 64 minutes.
Wow, that's a lot. They cut a lot out of it.
They did. They took an absolute crap ton out of it. So I'm just sat there completely transfixed by this film where, you'll see him stalking somebody and he'll go to run up to them and then it will just hard cut to him sat in his room talking to his spider again going, "Why did I do it, Jeremy? I'm not sure." When that just runs
Jeremy!
Yeah. Oh, it's just absolutely insane, the film is. And the best part of it as well is in the extra features for the film, there's a message from the director who basically writes this. I can only describe it as a testimony, just this super long, like multi-slide waxing about the history of horror and how horror's lost its way in the year 2000 and we need to bring it back to being all about the true violence and gore and shock that Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street and the Friday the 13th films sort of brought to the foray. And by the end of it, you don't sit there and think, yeah, this director's really got a point. You think, oh my God, this man thinks he's a genius.
Wow, that's so funny. I mean, hey, it sounds like a real trip to watch, and that's part of what makes doing this show exciting as well. And I can only imagine that it's even more explicit when you're going through sort of the cheesy movies and stuff of like that feeling of discovery and being like, what did I just watch? Like, I felt that way when I watched Lost Highway the first time for this movie, where I was like, you're just so baffled and so excited to get to talk about it and be like, everyone, look at this thing, this oddity.
It's just a fantastic feeling, isn't it? There's always a great moment when you discover something like that, and it's something I always try and keep an eye out for. It's almost like a sixth sense, sort of, where you're watching something and either a hard edit or just the way a character will look or the way a performance of a line will be delivered. And at that point, you'd realise, hang on a minute, I might actually be in for a really good time here. I know that it might have been a bit mediocre, but I'm going to stick with it. And 9 times out of 10, you find those hidden gems, and it's just so satisfying.
Yeah, definitely. So you're here to talk about the best horror movie ever made, but like you said, the bread and butter of your show is sort of on the other end of the spectrum, where you sort of have to sift through the dregs to find some gold. And I'm curious, not only how you got into horror in the first place, but also how you found yourself gravitating towards the cheesier B-movie side of things as well.
Well, funnily enough, I'd been listening to your cast for quite a while, so it gave me a bit of time to think about exactly where it came from. And I think probably in terms of horror films, my dad is probably the biggest influence in me discovering my first few horror films, because the first film he showed me was his second favourite film of all time, which is Jaws.
Wow, it's a good one.
Yeah, it's a hell of a hit. I was about 5, maybe 6 years old when he showed me that.
Oh, boy.
Because my dad's attitude is very similar to my attitude, which is that when it comes to things like the BBFC and censorship and age ratings and all that kind of thing, his attitude has always been, well, if a kid is old enough to understand and appreciate that this film isn't real and that the elements within the film are not to be sort of replicated in real life, then they should be allowed to watch it. So, for example, he had no trouble with showing me things like First Blood when I was growing up, because his attitude was, well, he knows that I very much doubt he's going to be able to get an AK-47 or a Rambo knife in the near future. And we hope. And even if he does manage to somehow get a hold of these things, he knows enough to know, hopefully, that going around and randomly murdering people probably isn't the best idea. So he sat me down and showed me Jaws as my first sort of foray into horror, and I think part of him did it mainly because he just wanted to see the Ben Gardner's boat scene where the head pops out, because if you've ever seen a 5 or 6 year old jump 8 foot clean in the air, it was just tremendous. And me and my partner, we both have opposite experiences because we both saw the film around the same age. And when that Ben Gardner scene happened, whereas I jumped 8 foot in the air, she just basically grabbed the cushion and went, yes, this is fantastic. She's the only person I know who gets sad when the shark dies in that film. But yeah, I wasn't massively a horror kid growing up. Obviously, I had the odd foray, like I say, in the sense of Jaws. My dad also I had a terrible phobia of dolls as a very young kid. My dad used to threaten to put Child's Play on unless I went to bed at a reasonable hour. So that was one
An effective threat.
Absolutely. Absolutely worked every time without fail. So I didn't really get properly into horror until sort of my early teens, sort of 12, 13, 14 time. When I remember rightly, I saw a supercut of some horror films playing on TV, just sort of like the best of the slashers or something like that. And I thought to myself, you know what, I might as well explore these because I quite like film. And I haven't really looked at horror very much. So I started taping the Friday the 13th movies off the TV. And I sort of had this little collection growing of the Friday the 13th movies. And then in high school, I met a guy who I later found out was maybe a little bit unstable. But he did help me get a lot of horror films, so it's kind of a bit of a trade-off. So I struck up a friendship with him, and he had all of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies on tape, and I had all the Friday the 13th ones, and neither of us had seen each other's films, so we just sort of did like a weekly swap with them.
Simpatico.
Yeah. Which really opened the doors, and then I started getting into the Halloween films, and again, I think it was a case of I had 4 and 5 and he had 1 and 2. So we swapped those round, so we sort of filled in the gaps. So through my sort of early teenage years, I sort of built up a knowledge of the mainstream horrors and really got to appreciate them. And then sort of in my mid-teens, I kind of drifted off on a bit of a side step, which was where I went into bad films and B-movies. And that was a rabbit hole I wasn't really expecting to fall into. I started looking at films like The Day That Time Ended, and one of the ones that always stuck in my mind for years was Bilsy Bub's Dollar Morte, which
That's a fun name.
Yeah. For a time, I really had a lot of self-loathing going on, because for a time it was my least favourite film of all time and I hated it. But the problem was, the film was made intentionally to be awful. So I was kind of in this catch-22 where I was like, I really want to say it's my worst film ever, but I know that he made it to be the worst film ever, so I don't want to give him the satisfaction of it being the worst film ever, because it is the worst film ever, but I don't want him to know that.
Don't want to give him the satisfaction.
Pretty much. Yeah. So I sort of drifted down there for a bit and explored more B-movies and bad movies and things like that. And then around my late teens, I ended up going back to university, where I met the co-host of one of the shows on my channel, the Comedy Dining Experience. His name's Ben, and he got me hard back into horror, but he got me in through a sort of alternate door, whereas rather than going and approaching the mainstream horrors, he took me in more through the Hammer and Amicus side of things. So I ended up watching films like The Witchmaster General and Twins of Evil and Vampire Circus and all that kind of stuff, which really sort of broadened it.
Just watched Twins of Evil myself the other day.
Fantastic. What did you think?
I liked it a lot. I thought it was a lot of fun. You don't get enough vampire jailbreaks these days, in my opinion.
Absolutely, it's a real classic. But funnily enough, it was Ben who finally nudged me into, because I'd always been a little bit reluctant to get into it, nudged me into the film that we're going to be talking about today. Because originally my uncle had given me a copy of this film when I was sort of in my mid-teens, and I was just coming out of watching the mainstream horrors, and he said, I think you should watch this, I think you'd really like it. And I sort of read the title and read the back of the box and went, this isn't really the Jason, Freddy, Michael cycle style film that I like. I'll watch it later. Yeah, so I sort of put it to the side, said thank you, because it's the British thing to do. You know, thank you very much. We'll just put it on the shelf and I'll never watch it. Thanks. But then a few years later at university, I told Ben that I'd not seen this film, and he was like, What do you mean you haven't seen this film? Dan, this is your film. This is the film that either you'll love it to pieces and you'll never question anything about it, or you'll think it's the worst thing in the world and then you'll still love it because you'll think it's trash. So
it is technically a B movie as well.
Yeah, technically. So we got together one night. I think he gave me a copy of it. I think he had the Blu-ray at the time. He lent it to me, and I sort of went away and watched it, and it changed my life. And
wow,
it's one of those films now that I watch yearly. It's an annual event every spring. I stick it on at the time that the film's supposed to take place in, and we go through the motions on it, and it's always a really fun experience.
Is there a B movie that you think is a really good introduction? Because one of the things that I sometimes have trouble with, because I am also a fan of B movies, is finding one that is good enough that it's not that it can still hook someone who's not necessarily used to a B movie, but has enough craziness to it that you get that B movie experience. So I'm wondering if there's one that you find is a better introduction than others.
It's a difficult one, really, because I know that everybody has different sort of tastes in what works and what doesn't.
Right.
I've gone through so many times where somebody has said, I really want to get into bad movies, and I'll sort of skip over the sci-fi originals and the Asylum films and go for something quite in that bracket, like, Manos the Hands of Fate or The Ring of Terror or Egar. And I'll sort of send it to them, and they'll come back going, "Oh yeah, that was great. I'm just going to stick with modern films. Thank you, Dan." That's sort of the beginning and end of it.
No,
yeah, I'd lost them. So nowadays, whenever it comes to sort of advising people where to go for B movies, I always tell them to preferably go and look at MST3K, because they cover B movies and bad movies, but they do it in an accessible way, which means that your average Joe Schmo who's probably never seen, Rocket Attack USA or Red Zone Cuba or, The African Queen or anything like that can go in and laugh and sort of slowly ease into that weird B-movie world, that strange vibe.
Right.
And once they've kind of got to grips with the mechanics of B-movies and what's the bits that are supposed to be intentionally funny and which bits are supposed to be just badly made funny and all of that kind of shtick, that's when I can kind of ease them more into non-riffed materials.
Interesting. Having the experts there to kind of hold their hands through, you think, is the best way that they can do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I've found in my experience. It sort of works double point really as well, because on the one hand it eases them into the waters gently, but then at the same time they can then come back to me and say, oh, I really liked The Day Time Ended, or I really liked Merlin's Shop of Wonders, and I can go, right, well, if you liked them, boom, and then I've got my pile ready. I can just sort of throw at them and say, here's 20 films that are exactly the same, but probably worth enjoy.
I co-signed by George. Do you have a favorite MST3K host?
I am probably Team Joel, if I'm going to be honest. There's just something about his relaxed demeanour that just very much sits right with me. When I first started putting together my show, it was coming up to nearly 3.5 years ago now. That's a blast from the past. When I first started putting together my show, Joel was a big influence on my delivery style, because I'm a very relaxed individual, sort of generally day to day. I didn't want to be one of these shouty critics who sort of turned up and went, this movie's a piece of crap and over the next 20 minutes I'm going to blow your mind. But I'm very much one of these people who just sort of likes to roll through a film, pick it apart gently, maybe put a bit of humour in, but I don't want to over-egg it too much, and just, treat it like what it is, which is it's a film that's probably not very well represented, probably not very well seen, and actually take it apart. So Joel was quite a big influence in taking that relaxed approach to film criticism and review. Although I have nothing against Mike or Jonah.
Sure.
Both fantastic reviewers, and I would argue that Jack Frost is probably one of my favourite episodes of MST3K. I put that out every Christmas.
Very nice.
But yeah, no, I'm probably Team Joel if I had to pick a camp.
Do you have a favorite subgenre in horror, and does it change depending on if you're watching like a B movie? Do you love cheap monster movies, but for a zombie flick you're like, oh, it's got to be like an actually good movie?
Absolutely. I would say my mac and cheese in terms of horror film subgenres would be slashers, and that's purely because it sort of runs the rainbow in terms of you've got your full-blown shot on video for 10p in somebody's back room, hour and a half schlock fest that's just completely unwatchable, shot on a potato. And then the other side of the spectrum, you've got this film was $500,000 in 1946, and it broke an industry, and it's one of the greatest films ever made. So I like the fact that it runs that gauntlet of cost, balance, and directional choices. But I also like that it has emphasis that can change. So, for example, you can get slashers that are maybe more thriller-oriented. You can get slashers that are maybe more gore-oriented. So you can kind of fine-tweak your viewing experience to exactly the vibe you're feeling.
Gore-oriented, even.
Yeah, exactly. No, nice. I like it. Exactly. Yeah, perfect. It's exactly that. It's the fact that you can get those exact measures just right. I mean, the downside to it is it means that you end up with a film collection that consists of maybe 600, 700 slasher films where every one of them is only viewable under very specific circumstances. It's like, oh, I'm only in the mood for Nail Gun Massacre tonight. No other film will do.
Hey, we've all been there, though. We've all been there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But then what normally guides my night in terms of films is the vibe that film, the previous film, will end on. So, for example, if I use Nail Gun Massacre as an example, I will probably sit and watch that all the way through, and I'll go, okay, that film was awful. It's very, very good fun. I want to keep that momentum going. I'm feeling a bit more like I want something fun. I'll put Blood Theatre on, which is exactly the same, but it's got more of a John Waters edge to it. And then when that's finished, I'll go, okay, I've had enough of the fun now. I maybe want something a bit more serious. I'll put Day of the Dead on, and that'll sort of carry the train going. And it's just, that's how I tend to structure my nights. I just sort of go on the vibe that the previous film left me with, so to speak.
Nice. Hey, I respect that. Very laissez-faire, a free-flowing approach that I respect a lot.
Oh, yes, thank you.
But the movie that we're talking about today, that you said is one of your favorites, it is in fact the best horror movie ever made, the 1973 British horror movie, The Wicker Man. Ooh. It's a great one. It's a really, really fantastic movie. It's so it stars Edward Woodward. Fun name to say.
Mm-hmm. We in the UK we always have a joke trivia question we have at quiz nights that'll always pop up, and it's true or false, Edward Woodward. And some people will go false, and you go, no, it's true, he would.
He certainly would, in my opinion. And it also stars Christopher Lee, absolutely fascinating guy. intelligence officer with the RAF in World War II, released several metal albums. He's been in over 275 movies, including incredible roles as Saruman in the Lord of the Rings series. He voiced Death in several Discworld adaptations. He was Scaramanga in The Man with the Golden Gun. However, certainly at the time that this movie came out, and perhaps even to this day, depending on who you ask, he was most well known for having already appeared in the Hammer horror films for over a decade, notably the Dracula series in particular.
Absolutely. This film was actually the film he was hoping to kind of distance himself from Hammer on. He'd been with Hammer since at least 1957, I want to say, with The Curse of Frankenstein.
Right.
And he'd built up his notoriety for being the sort of strong, silent type, as playing roles of Dracula and the Mummy and Frankenstein. So he was kind of getting a bit tired of being typecast as just this strong, silent type and wanted to kind of break away into more interesting areas of horror. So that was how Peter Snell, who was the owner of the film company that produced The Wicker Man, British Lion, and Anthony Shaffer, basically sort of met and got together and decided to start looking for a way to get Christopher Lee into a new vehicle, so to speak.
Yeah, so Anthony Shaffer is the screenwriter, and they also got Robin Hardy involved as the director, and Shaffer and Hardy decided that the way that they were going to really break out of this image is by strongly contrasting the Hammer films, which have a pretty serious Christian bent to them a lot of the times, especially because they are so vampire heavy. And they would make a movie that focused on old religion and this sort of paganism that is reflected in The Wicker Man. Now, parallel to this, British actor and author David Pinner wrote a film treatment for a movie called Ritual, where a devout Christian policeman is called to investigate what appears to be a ritual murder of a young girl in a rural village. Sounds familiar. Mm-hmm. The director attached to the movie, though, declined the treatment, and so Pinner turned it into a novel in the late 60s. This is the book that Shaffer adapted as a screenplay called Ritual, and he started working with it and then decided that a direct adaptation wouldn't work, and so he kind of just lifted the story, much to Pinner's displeasure. He feels like he didn't get the credit that he deserves because there's a lot of inspiration seemingly taken from it, even if they're not doing a one-to-one adaptation.
Absolutely. And of course, as well, the other big issue that cropped up from this as well is the three of them had stumped up £5,000, which in 1970s money was quite a lot, to buy those rights. And I believe there was even some litigation at some point between Pinner and Shaffer over exactly what was stolen because, borrowed. So Shaffer denied that he'd basically wholesale stolen the plot of Rituals, but he was also very keen to state that there were some scenes that may have just been influenced by it.
Right.
Which I think is very, very shrewd of him to go with we might have nicked your stuff, but we're not going to say, basically.
Right.
That's the angle he approached.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to say that, like, there's no similarities or anything. So I do think it is smart of him to be like, look, you take on everything that you look at becomes part of you. You know, it's impossible to control where your subconscious takes things. Sure, maybe I read the book and it influenced me a little bit, whatever. And, at the end of the day, this, I think, is it's a great movie, and who knows what would have happened if it had been a direct adaptation. Might not have been nearly as good.
Absolutely. So. There's a script writer of mine who's a personal favourite. He wrote a lot of Doctor Who, the original series of Doctor Who. His name's Terence Dix, and he always has this quote that I absolutely love, and I carry it with me to this day, which is that you can have an original idea, but it needn't be your original idea.
That is a great quote.
I
think it's really funny that even in like the turn of the 70s, you had people focusing on this nonsense of elevated horror because Shaffer he's quoted as saying that he wanted the film to be, quote, a little more literate than the average horror picture, specifically wanting a minimum of violence and gore because he was tired of seeing horror films that relied almost entirely on viscera to be scary. So even in the early 70s, you had this type of person getting involved.
Absolutely, and I mean it gets better still, because not only was he punching down in that sense, he was punching up too, because he was quoted as well as having a go at the execs at British Lion, because as we'll get into inevitably towards the later half of the film, the senior staff at British Lion changed hands halfway through the film's production. So the half that commissioned it really loved the film, and then the half who didn't wanted it gone. And Schaefer was quoted as saying that if you basically submerge yourself in Carry On Camping, On the Buzzes movies, and just utter trash, you're never going to have a good idea of what good horror cinema truly is. Which I just think is just, it's so snotty. It's one of the most British retorts I've ever seen. It's like, oh, well, if you like that sort of thing.
Right. But one thing I will say, you have to respect that if he was going for this elevated horror, and he did the research, he did the dive, he did a ton of research on paganism, because he and Hardy really conceived the film as presenting the pagan elements objectively and accurately. He also wanted it to be accompanied by authentic music and a believable contemporary setting to give it that grounded feeling and create the unease of possibility. The only reason that this is effective as a horror movie is because it feels so possible for a group of people to have just sort of sequestered themselves. And without that feeling of authenticity, this just becomes a fantasy film instead.
Absolutely. There was, funnily enough, the one of the materials that he was very heavily reliant on, Schaefer, when it came to writing the script for the Wicker Man, there was I always forget if it was 12 or 13 volume, but there was a compendium that was released in the 1950s and 60s called The Golden Bough,
right?
Which was basically a series that sort of, the first half of it dealt with pagan practices and sort of paganism in general, and went through all of that in very, very graphic detail about exactly what that was involved. But then the second half of it dealt with how pagan traditions and those pagan things that were discussed in the first half have been implemented into 20th century culture. So, for example, you have the March Hare and the Easter Bunny being a parallel that basically Christianity wholesale adapted like 95% of pagan values and sort of traditions. Like Christmas was a pagan festival originally, but Christians just sort of went, oh, well, that's ours now. So it was kind of drawing comparisons and sort of saying, well, you know, a lot of what Howie is kind of rejecting in this film as blatant paganism, if you just sort of sanitize it slightly, is basically Christianity.
Right. It's really interesting because the reason that early Christianity did that is to make it an easy shift from paganism into Christianity as they tried to convert people. But the problem in quotes with that is that it obviously works the other way as well, in that it's very easy to sort of see it as this phony sham that's propped up on the back of another religion. And it kind of makes the whole ritual of everything ring false. And I think that is very interesting when you look at what this movie is saying in terms of Lord Summerisle and them, the way that this island started just being sort of cynical like that. And the whole thing, I think it just asks you to sort of look at them side by side in a very interesting way.
No, absolutely. It's nice to see, in particular, there's a scene later on in the film where Howie and Summerisle kind of have at it, so to speak, about paganism versus Christianity. And throughout it, you can see Lord Summerisle is absolutely relishing the opportunity to just completely and totally deconstruct Howie's world, so to speak, because to Howie as a character, Christianity is the beginning and end. That's his be all and end all. He doesn't even conceive that any other religion could be right, because, you know, the UK is a Christian country and Christianity is it. So when Summerisle literally deconstructs the whole sort of idea of the virgin birth and of Jesus as a force and Christianity in general, it's wonderful just to see just how the pressures build between the two of them as it goes on throughout that. I also love the fact as well that Summerisle literally does not give a shit that Howie regularly slanders paganism. Like, throughout the whole thing, Howie's like, your God is false and you're all going to hell and you're all going to burn, and he's just there with a smirk on his face going, you have no idea.
Right, yeah, that sort of being above it is so interesting. And you know, when you look at the Beetle comparison between Howie and yeah, I mean, we'll get to it all, but basically, yes, it's a really interesting sort of parallel between Christianity and paganism, and the way that they sort of conflict in this movie. The image of the Wicker Man, which gave the film its title, is taken from a sentence in Julius Caesar's account of his wars in what is now France. I believe it was Gaul at the time. Mm-hmm. And Caesar claimed that the local tribes there had executed their most serious criminals by burning them alive in a huge man-shaped sculpture of woven twigs. For Schaefer, this was the most alarming and imposing image I had ever seen, he said, which... It is. It's very imposing and scary.
It really is. For the promotional materials of the film The Wicker Man, they initially didn't want to show The Wicker Man. They wanted to make it more of a, oh my God, this is a drastic thing. You know, they wanted to make that shock very, very real. But British Lion really put their foot down and basically said, you can't have a film called The Wicker Man that features a man being burnt in a giant Wicker Man and not show the Wicker Man in the promotional footage. We need that to sell the movie. So, but I love the idea of if they had gone with the original plan of not showing the Wicker Man in any of the promotional materials, because that scene, if you went into it in 1973 with no prior knowledge that was going to happen, would just be like... I don't know, you'd be climbing the walls by the end of it. You wouldn't know what to do.
When this movie was being made, the film industry of Britain was, quote, in crisis.
That's to put it lightly.
And this was no different for British Lion Films, which, as you say, was the company behind this. They were in dire financial straits. And it got bought by wealthy businessman John Bentley, and basically in order to convince the unions that he wasn't trying to just asset strip the company, he was like, all right, I got to get a film into production quickly. And that was Wicker Man, baby.
Fast pass, yes, we love it, pagans, Burning Man, yeah, just get it made. Here's £450,000, make it happen.
Exactly, they were like, go make it happen. And that meant that The Wicker Man, which is set during the spring, began filming in October of 1972, and they had to resort to like fake trees and fake leaves and blossoms being glued to trees that were there but bare.
They imported so many palm trees.
It's why, I mean, this cuts into their already small budget, which translates into roughly £5.75 million today, which translates to roughly $7.5 million today. So, in order to get the movie made, because they had to get everyone to this island, they had to film everything there. There was a lot of costumes and a lot of production value stuff that they had to work on. And since he had been so involved in the process, Christopher Lee was like, all right, I'm going to do this movie for nothing. Like, I'm not going to take any pay on this. Reportedly, several others did as well. So, you know, I think that really speaks to the sort of belief in the film, at least, but like that the people had in it, which is always a good indicator that it's at least going to turn out decently.
This is the thing. I mean, Christopher Lee throughout. Because I mean, I'm a massive Christopher Lee fan. I've loved him in all of the Dracula films. I loved him in The Wicker Man. I've loved him in Lord of the Rings. He's a phenomenal force, and he always comes across as absolutely gentlemanly. And if he genuinely believes in something, he always came across to me, at least, as being somebody who would go all out to ensure that it was done. So for him to turn up on The Wicker Man, having already sunk a portion of his own money into the botched rituals purchase, and say, you know what, I really like this film, I think it's going to be really good, I'm going to do it for free, I think that was really respectable. Just as well, another note in terms of the location filming, I know that you mentioned it was shot in the autumn. It was largely filmed around Scotland. There were 25 locations in Scotland, and if you've ever been to Scotland in the autumn or winter, you'll know that it's not just cold, it's absolutely bitter. It's below zero most of the time. Wow. It's raining sideways every day uncontrollably. It's a thoroughly cold, miserable and uninhabitable place. And the area that they were filming in, Newton Stewart, which was where they filmed the bulk of the scenes for The Wicker Man, was undergoing modernisation at the time. So, like, literally the direction the camera is pointing in the film, if you were seeing what was behind the camera, you would just see like a building site. So it was just a building site in the rain. It was like -4 every day.
Wow.
Freezing
Sounds like
cold.
hell, honestly.
Yeah. Absolutely. So the fact again that Christopher Lee was like, "Yeah, I don't need any money for this. I'm just here to enjoy myself," was just like,
you gotta respect it.
Ridiculous.
You absolutely gotta respect it. And as you say, it was filmed across plenty of Scottish towns and stuff. Delightfully named 201, including Gatehouse of Fleet, Newton Stewart, Kirkcudbright, and Creetown in Galloway, as well as Plockton in Rossshire. So some real great town names there.
I love the classics.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't? Interestingly, halfway through filming, they decided it's a musical now. Which, I mean, I wish more things made that decision halfway through. I love a good musical, and there needs to be more horror musicals, in my opinion.
Absolutely. They roped in Paul Giovanni for the honour of producing the score for The Wicker Man. Giovanni had a history in folk music, and Schaefer basically shared some of the notes on paganism, but he pretty much already got a good idea of what he was looking to do. So yeah, he had an absolute ball. He said it was one of his favourite projects to work on, was doing all of the musical numbers and incidental music for The Wicker Man.
Yeah, it's great. He does such a great job with it too. I mean, it's all fantastic. I mean, I assume that you like it as well.
Oh, it's just... I have the soundtrack on CD, I have it on cassette tape, I have it on vinyl, I have it on heavy-duty vinyl.
Wow. No matter how you want to listen to it, you're prepared.
I've got it. I can get you the copy of the Wicker Man soundtrack in 6 minutes or less, or your money back. Yeah, I absolutely adore it. Some of the tracks on there are wonderfully composed. The Landlord's Daughter is a personal favourite of mine.
I love Corn Rigs. That's my favorite one.
Absolutely, and they use almost every other moment of the film to make you remember that song, because whenever Howie does any of his travelling, that song just immediately starts fading up.
Yeah, it does.
Which is beautiful. The Maypole song as well is another one that I have a real soft spot for, just for how surreal it all is. And again, depending on which cut of the film you watch, that either gently sort of graciously comes in or just wrecking balls straight in. It's just like, it's either like soft, nice transitions or hard cut. That's it. There's no... No middle ground.
This, like you say, it was composed and arranged by Paul Giovanni under the direction of Hardy and Schaefer. They had already done a lot of research into the music based on the work of Cecil Sharp, who was a founding father of the folk revival movement in the early 20th century. And they used Sharp's collection as a template. Schaefer told Giovanni which scenes were going to have music, and he occasionally also provided appropriate lyrics from the research that he had done. The other songs that aren't done by Giovanni are from folk traditions, though, including The Delightful Corn Rigs, which is a later folk song by Scotland's national bard Robert Burns, which does play, like you say, when Howie is traveling. Interestingly, though, although they used the lyrics of this 1775 song, the tune was made for the movie. So it's kind of this really interesting blend of the past and the present coming together. I think that it really, it might have just been a necessity, but it does sort of reflect the movie in an interesting way.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it plays further still into the tones of the film in the sense of pagan traditions being modernised. I think it's taking older, forgotten works that were more prevalent when sort of, large communities would have songs that would just travel from village to village in the UK and giving it that modern twist, which is wonderful. One of the things I'm very big on is film recycling, the idea of taking old materials that have been considered spent and actually making them better than they were or improving on them. So the idea that they've taken all these really classic sort of rounds and ballads and things like that were just sung amongst workers as they worked and have given them this boost and this upgrade to make them these really beautiful folk compositions, it always really never fails to put a smile on my face.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really great. They also reach all the way back to the mid-13th century with the song at the end of the film, Sumer is Ecumen in.
Written by the Goosebumps girl.
Indeed she did. But by late 73, the movie started wrapping and finishing shooting. British Lion was scrambling and failing to avoid bankruptcy. And so a new studio head was put in place named Michael Dealey, and Dealey really didn't like The Wicker Man because he thought that it was blasphemous. To that end, he suggested a more upbeat ending to the film, which I'll mention as it comes up. I don't want to jump that far ahead, but the suggestion was refused. And so basically Dealey told them to get fucked and started trying to unload it as quickly as possible while also demanding cuts, winding up with a 99-minute version of the film, now known as the extended cut.
Yes, also known as the director's cut as well, also known as this is the most film that we actually have of the Wicker Man all put together. As we'll get into, they were not only were they not fucked about the film, they were not fucked about the preservation of the film in any way, shape or form, as we'll no doubt get into later.
Right. And so this movie, originally it played at Cannes with this 99-minute version. Roger Corman expressed interest in the U.S. distribution, and so they sent him the full movie for advice on what to cut. And basically he came back to them and was like, here's another 13 or so minutes that you can get rid of. They didn't consult the director or anything. They just said, great, thank you, Roger Corman. They made those cuts.
Pretty much. It gets better as well, because after he got in touch with them about the cuts, they were like, so we also heard you want to do distribution. What kind of money are you talking about for this film we're going to cut for you? And he went, about $50,000. And they went, no.
Yeah, that was not enough for them. They wanted to recoup more of the expenses. So they turned to a company called National General, which is like the most fake-sounding company name in the world.
It's like Inc. Incorporated.
Exactly.
It's just like,
But National General agreed to buy the rights for $300,000, and so they were psyched about that. British Lion was like, great. 4 days after signing the deal, National General went bankrupt.
Game over.
And so now the rights passed to the Warner Brothers company, which they had this film. They tested it primarily in drive-ins in the Bay Area, some in Atlanta as well, like some college theaters. And it did actually get a really positive review in Variety magazine, but testing was lukewarm and they pulled it. And it's kind of understandable because, like they said, like, how do you expect this movie to play to people who are busy making out in the back of their dad's Ford? Like, it's not really that kind of movie. It really sort of demands your attention and for you to actually engage in the world of the film, unlike something that's a little bit more flash, No,
absolutely. And this then kind of caused a bit of a backpedal on both Warner Brothers and British Lion's part, because they were both then basically scrabbling to wring the rag as dry as they possibly could of any money that they could make from the film. So British Lion immediately went in with, well, why don't we try and make it a double feature, which was the worst possible move because double features were just going extinct at this point. Nobody was going to double feature screenings.
Just a real slap in the face for the Wicker Man.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Not only was it resigned to a double feature, it was resigned as the B picture in a double feature, which was like that's the low of the low, so to speak. And it got so bad that Christopher Lee ended up ringing up any friends, acquaintances, film critics, anyone he could to get them to go and see the film. In particular, film critics, he offered to pay them to go and attend the film to write reviews for it. At this exact same time that it was going on, Warner Brothers looked at what British Lion were doing and went, right, okay, well, we've invested in this film, we better try and do something. So they started putting it out on the double feature circuit in the US. This was at the very tail end because it only had a very limited screening run. But I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what the film they double featured it with was.
In the UK, the movie that it played with was Don't Look Now, starring Donald Sutherland. I don't know if it was the same movie in the US, but that was at least it for the UK. And it was well received. The critics who did see it liked it, and the people in America who saw it liked it, but it like you say, it had this really limited run, and the lack of availability in America sort of gave it a little bit more of an allure than it had over in the UK. And cut to 1976.
Oh, sorry, can I just take you off your tail there? There is one extra final roll of the dice that Warner Brothers did that was only very limited, but it did go out. So after the double features stuff didn't exactly set anyone's socks on fire, they went back and they thought, right, well, what are we going to do with this film? At the last minute, they kind of thought, well, we've got to try and recoup some losses. And one of the things that was quite prevalent in the 60s and 70s, it might even have been the 50s as well, was the idea of 8mm distribution. So before the days of VHS, you would get between 3 and 6 film reels released by film companies that would contain the edited highlights of the best bits of Earth versus the Flying Saucers or the Rocky Horror Picture Show, two of the most notable ones that had 8mm releases that the public could buy, and they could play on Super 8 projectors and sort of have the film in their house before the days of VHS. So they very briefly dabbled with the idea of potentially doing a 8mm cut of The Wicker Man, which would have run between 8 and 15 minutes. There isn't a lot of information about this print available. There's a couple of references to it in a couple of academic papers, and a couple of film critics, Mark Kermode and I think Kim Newman, have touched on this briefly. But the idea was that they were going to recut the double feature length version of the film into a triple feature length cut, which would run between 8 and 15 minutes long. And they would show it as part of triple bill screenings, preferably in grindhouse theatres.
I just don't even know what you could possibly compress this film into for 8 to 15 minutes.
I'm going to tell you the exact plot beats of this film, or at least what is known about this film. So it runs between 8 and 15 minutes, and here is the triple bill cut of The Wicker Man. How he lands his plane at the harbour, he talks to some of the harbour people about the disappearance of Rowan Morrison. He walks along the bay and he finds Rowan at the beach about to be sacrificed. He picks her up, they go up to the Wicker Man and then get burnt. And that's the end of the film.
Wow.
Which is just... all the nuance is gone. We don't need musical numbers. It's just done. That's the triple cut.
I think really funny.
It got screened like 2, maybe 3 times, and then they just went, no, and then it never got an 8mm release. But that's my favourite cut of the Wicker Man, one that I can't get a hold of, because I would just love to see the audacity of it.
Yeah, that's how you know you're a real one, is if you've seen the 8mm cut.
Forget the director's cut. I'm OG, I only do the 8mm cut. I need answers now. Which, surprisingly, probably would have made Michael Dealey a lot happier, you know.
Yeah, I'm sure it would have. And hey, you know what? They were ahead of their time. This is the TikTok of 1970s.
Absolutely. I find it such a ludicrous idea that they would even consider it. I mean,
yeah, this movie in particular, I think, is really particularly poorly suited to it.
Yeah, it's almost like they took the Mona Lisa and put a blur filter on it. It's just all those fine details gone. Just beats. That's all that was left.
Yeah, that's a bad idea, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, a few more years go by. 1976, Warner Brothers sells the rights to the movie for just $20,000 to a little company called Abraxas.
Oh, God.
Hardy, who is now based in America, working on screenplays at this point, calls them up, and he's like, hey, just so you know, you're buying the bullshit version.
They're like, oh.
Yeah, right? He's like, there's an extended cut out there. It's better, I'm sure. You should try and get that. And so Abraxas is interested because it is run by some people who are genuinely interested in film. So it's not a purely monetary decision that they're doing here. And together, they start looking for copies of the original. However, by this time, British Lion had completely gone under, and in the transition to the new company, the 368 reels worth of footage had been thrown out, rumored to have been used as landfill in the nearby M3 motorway while it was being built. So
that was later debunked, unfortunately, as well. Basically, Peter Snell, who was one of the co-workers at British Lion, who was still working there after British Lion had gone bump, and Christopher Lee helped to seek up the inquiries on the London side, because Hardy was based in America at the time.
Right.
And when they found out all the rushes were destroyed, I think Christopher Lee either went on a talk show or did an interview for a magazine where he said something to the effect of, oh yes, they've probably all been used as landfill for the M3. But afterwards he sort of clarified that he didn't know what happened to the rushes, because generally what tended to happen was they'd just be magnetised and then skipped. So they'd sort of be run through a giant magnet that would wipe any sort of tape footage, and in the case of film it would just be burnt, and then they'd just be sent off to general landfill. But yeah, Lee basically, I think, in a bit of a huff about the fact that
he was just being sassy about it.
Yeah, because his passion project had been junked, just picked something relevant, which was the construction of the M3 motorway at the time, and went, yeah, they're probably all there.
Wow.
which it was later turned out was not the case. But
there you go.
It's stuck in fan circles for years. That ran for at least 30 or 40 years. People going, oh yeah, no, if you go and dig up the M3 motorway, you might find a deleted scene of the mainland.
Hey, this is a little mini episode of Mythbusters here in the middle of Best Little Horror House in Philly. Ka-chunk busted. But it occurred to them to check with Corman, and thankfully, Corman is a guy who, like, gets it, the importance of archiving, and he still had the only copy of the extended cut left in existence, which, good, thank goodness for Roger Corman.
Oh, God bless the man. He gave me some of my favourite Vincent Price films, so I can't knock him.
He's a producer extraordinaire, to be sure. He's got a lot of hits in the old tank there.
Oh, yeah.
But they made a duplicate of it. They went to work restoring it for an American release. This still has a few cuts in it that were agreed on, like the mainland introduction, but eventually the definitive cut was released to rave reviews in America, with the magazine Cinefantastique going as far as to release a commemorative issue and label it the Citizen Kane of horror.
Which is so classy for this film.
Yeah, right? I'm sure that everything that they were talking about when they were like, we're going to make an elevated horror movie, like, that was all vindicated in that moment.
Just seeing Anthony Schaefer reading his copy of Cinefantastique going, yes, yes, finally. But then both the director's cut and the final cut disappeared off the face of the earth to UK viewers. The US managed to get it in various forms over the years, but the theatrical cut in the UK was the de facto version, the only one that people could really actively get a hold of, unless you had a US friend who was keen to import obscure British horror films. So yeah, and then it sat that way for the best part of 20 to 30 years. We'd get the occasional screening of the theatrical cut on terrestrial television, so Channel 3 ITV, and I think the BBC did it once. But it wasn't until 2001 that the UK and the US both got the respective copies. So the UK didn't really get the director's cut of the film until around 2001. And the US didn't get the copy of the theatrical cut until then either, which I think that the UK got the better deal out of that.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Yeah, hey, it happens. Sometimes you take one for the team.
Oh, yeah. What astounded me, though, because, like I say, when you asked me to potentially be on the show, I immediately started looking into it, and what did astound me from the US standpoint is how many alternate versions of this film actually did the rounds in America, because the first sort of pieces of information I could find about it was like, oh, the director's cut was only sort of marketed around in fan circles, and it was very hush-hush, and it was who you knew, not what you knew, would get you access to the director's cut of the film. And then the more I dug, I found that there was like 4 or 5 releases of the middle cut, but with like a minute or two missing on each version. So like one version would be 95 minutes, another would be 96, right. Another would be 94. And then all of this went on. And then I looked at the UK release history, and it was like there was a pre-cert release that was 10 minutes short, released in 1975-76. And then it didn't get seen again on video until about the late 80s. And then it didn't get seen again until the late 90s. And then it went DVD, Blu-ray, and that's it. It was like there was 6 releases in the US, and we had like 3.
When we, like you said, we were talking about sort of what movie we were going to talk about, and you were like, by the way, which cut are you going to watch? And I was like, what are you talking about? Because I had already seen this movie, but I just was like, sure, I'll just watch whatever cut I can find. And
that was when you came back to me and said, I found this one called the triple cut. I don't know if it's
yeah, I threw it out. It was only 18 minutes.
No. Be a short episode, very short episode.
Hey, you'd be surprised. We did that outer space short and still managed to talk for an hour. So.
Oh wow!
But like the version that we will be talking about is this sort of director's cut, middle ground one. Like we said, Christopher Lee loves this movie. He paid for his own press tour out of his pocket, and he hit every stop willing to interview him about the movie, with rumors abounding of live public access early morning shows in Iowa appearances. So,
I should also warn you in advance, whichever cut of The Wicker Man you choose to watch will always be the least liked version.
it's just like Blade Runner.
Yeah, effectively. It's like the people who like the theatrical cut, which is me, are hated by everybody because the theatrical cut is seen as the worst one. But I personally think it's the best because it's the most tightest. It's the one that cuts all the lean out. It's literally just you get the film, everything in it, boom, done. The final cut, which is the one we're talking about, is kind of the middle ground. It gives you a little bit more breathing space. It puts a couple of songs back in. It rearranges some scenes. It moves things around. And that's considered the definitive version, as you mentioned, by Robin Hardy, because that's the one that he cut last and the one he was happiest with. And then you've got the director's cut, which is basically the one with all of the footage in that only the really hardcore purists like, because it's ridiculously long, to the point where you might as well start making a bed up before the before the midpoint, because it goes on so long.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it is nice to have your options.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we do get the triple cut favorites, but we largely ignore those.
And of course, you can compare Christopher Lee's love of this movie to Rod Stewart, who tried to block the release when he learned that his then girlfriend Britt Eklund appeared naked in the movie. Rod,
yes.
Imagine that history where Rod Stewart just managed to completely block The Wicker Man from ever becoming part of horror canon because his ex-girlfriend. Now his ex-girlfriend was naked in it.
Yeah, and I mean, she's only naked from the top half up.
Right.
Her bottom half, so you had to get a stunt person in because she was pregnant at the time. Yeah, there was a stunt arse, which is amazing. And the best part of it was, after the film came out, she did another interview. I don't know whether she likes the film or doesn't like the film, because every time she's asked to do an interview about it. Yeah. Well, every time she's asked to do an interview about it, she's like, yeah, sure, brilliant. And then she turns up and just shits on it for an hour. And it's just like, why? But yeah, she didn't like a stunt double because apparently she had a fat arse, which is just But that being said, as well, she's also overdubbed all the way through the film. So
she has a thick Swedish accent, right?
Yeah, they tried to get her to do a Scottish accent, and she literally just could not do it. So in the end, they got. Let me just find it. I've written it down because the name was very familiar, and I couldn't figure where I'd put it. Just 1 second. Sorry, I'm going through editing notes here.
No problem.
It was redubbed by somebody called Annie Ross, who you'll probably best know as Granny Ruth from the Basket Case films.
Wow.
She played a character called Vera in Superman 3. She overdubbed the entire of Britt Eklund's lines, which she was not happy about. And that was one of the reasons that led to her doing an interview during the production of the film where she basically said it was the most dismal experience of her life and she never wanted to work in film again.
Hey, listen, I'll be honest. I can kind of understand where she's coming from.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
It's not very nice.
No.
I think in that interview, she talks about how, it's compounded by the fact that, they lied to her about what was going to be happening and everything. So certainly not an ideal scenario for her.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was a miserable experience as somebody who's been on shoots in the middle of winter in the UK and sort of been present on sets that are well below zero. I can tell you that after a couple of hours, the sheen of the Hollywood system very quickly wears off, and it very quickly just becomes, what on earth am I doing with my life? So to have to do that through, multiple days of shooting with very little to no respite, feeling a bit isolated, and also having to deal with pregnancy and things like that, I can totally imagine that she was having probably the most miserable time in the world.
Yeah, I agree. So to get into the actual movie, we're going to shift gears here into that. It starts off the day after my birthday on April 29th, 1973. Oh. So
many happy returns.
Thank you. We call it Wicker Man Day. We see Police Sergeant Neil Howie, and this dude is bam, Christian, singing those psalms at the top of his lungs, sermonizing, taking communion. And one thing I think is really interesting is that it's sort of presented like a classic montage of an action hero preparing for battle. And that is sort of what he's doing here, is preparing to go into battle.
Absolutely. It's one of those ones where he's sort of mentally preparing himself to go out and do police work. I mean, the main reason why it's cut the way it is because when it came to re-editing the director's cut into the theatrical cut, they had to remove as much of the mainland footage as possible because it was seen as incredibly boring. And the church sequence was originally set to run for nearly double the length that it currently runs for.
Not ideal.
Yeah, no, not at all. So they largely sort of supercut it together. at the time that the film came out, there wasn't really that much of a superhero scene, so to speak. But I get what you're saying completely. It's very much that kind of, it establishes straight away that Howie is a hardcore Christian who will not take any nonsense. He believes what he believes, and it does have that feeling of preparing to venture out into unknown territory, so to speak.
Yeah.
And sort of that especially the scene where he's taking communion, which again really sort of re-emphasizes that almost protection element. Like, it's almost, you could imagine a similar scene with somebody armoring up, so to speak.
Right.
He's taking his
Rambo.
bread and his wine. Yeah,
putting the bandana
pretty
on.
much. Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, no, I agree. It's one of those scenes that weirdly was probably cut for time, but has been cut into a better shape for it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Even if they weren't like, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to make it so that it's like an action movie, winds up becoming that way. And, the movie kind of has a life of its own in the editing room. So it does, I think, definitely come out for the better. And Edward Woodward, enjoy that comparison to Rambo, because I'm sure that it does not happen frequently for Neil Howie.
We are making connections tonight, ladies and gents.
Also, the preacher is the director, I read. So that's fun.
Yeah, nice little cameo in there from Mr. Hardy.
Howie journeys by seaplane to a remote island in the Hebrides, an archipelago off the west coast of Scotland named Summerisle. And he flies over, we get just these beautiful landscapes, and the Corn Rigs song kicks in, and I just I love it. I really love that opening sequence.
Such a nice montage of shots, and especially, I started on the DVD version, then went back to the VHS version, then went up to the Blu-ray version. The transition from VHS to Blu-ray is just next level. The 35mm elements for this film have been restored perfectly. Everything looks so crisp and vibrant and colourful, which is especially surprising, as we mentioned, it was filmed in the middle of extremely rainy, horrible, cold Scotland in the middle of winter, nearly a sort of autumn-winter bordering. So for them to be able to create such a lush and colourful opening sequence and have that music so powerful it's beautiful. Really nice. Yeah.
The Evil Eye rowing boat, which takes Sergeant Howie to and from his plane, was actually not made for this movie. It was belonged to a resident of Plockton. And basically the producers saw it and they were like, we're going to commandeer that boat, brother. And they put it in the movie.
The British way. You see that? That's ours now. Take care. On your way.
The boat actually did survive until 2004, when unfortunately it was destroyed in a storm. Rip to that boat.
Oh,
a real one.
Gone but not forgotten.
Yeah.
Elton John is writing a sequel to Candle in the Wind as we speak.
Boat in the storm.
Yes.
And so Howie is there to investigate the disappearance of the young girl Rowan Morrison, about whom he has received an anonymous letter addressed to him personally. This is, it's a sort of stock setup, but it's used very effectively here, I think, especially the way that it's sort of the little breadcrumbs of it get revealed, where he's like, I'm here on this like remote island. By the way, I got this letter. By the way, it's about a young girl disappearing. By the way, it was sent directly to me, not just to like the police station. I think it does a really good job of sort of establishing this mystery right away.
Yeah, absolutely. It really starts just getting that momentum building up. And the response from the villagers who were sort of occupying the harbour at that time of denying that anything about this is even a thing. Like, they're like, not only does this girl not exist, no one could have possibly sent you that letter. You shouldn't be here. There's nothing to worry about. Go away.
Yeah, even the most cursory info is given up just begrudgingly. They don't want to even let him onto the island. Like, they don't want to let him land even.
Absolutely. And the best part of this as well is that the final cut and the theatrical cut really get to the meat and gravy of this straight away. Within sort of 5 to 10 minutes, you're at that harbour and all of this is being unfolded. If you were still watching the director's cut at this point, you'd still be in the mainland, because the majority of that cut focuses entirely on how he sort of setting himself up as the righteous police officer. So to have these two cuts just straight away drop you in it and give you both all of the information and none of the information at the same time, if you know what I mean, is super quick. It's just getting those beats down right away. And if you're rewatching this film for the first time and you know what happens, you see all these nice little flicks in the extras, all these little twitches of the eye, little smiles, things like that, because you know what they know. They know, this is our meal ticket, so to speak. That's why one of the reasons I love this film is the rewatch value as well, of just seeing all these little flourishes of facial emotions and things like that you don't pick up on the first viewing is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And he goes to check in with Mae Morrison, who runs the post office, and she's like, "No way, my kid's right here, man." First of all, I think that's just really funny, but then also the daughter seems like she's going to provide some insight, but she's actually talking about a hair, which doubles down on sort of this like, oh man, he's really not going to catch a break anywhere here.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the utter reluctance of them to even admit. I mean, like you say, he literally has to drag them kicking and screaming to admit that she even begins to exist, let alone that she is Mae Morrison's daughter and that she's, lived here for years. And just that Richter smile that Mae Morris gives Sergeant Howie when she's like, no, this is my daughter. You've never seen the other one. I'd only have one daughter and she's the perfect thing. And he's just sort of sitting there going, well, somebody has sent me this letter and this picture of this girl and it's directed at you, so I need an answer. What's going on here? It's just how hands off everybody is in that scene, and how bristly Howie is to try and figure out what on earth is actually going on.
Yeah, they're really letting him sort of carve his own path to self-destruct. He goes to check into the inn on the island, and this is when Willow is asked to show him to his room, and he's treated to another song, a bawdy barroom shanty about the landlord's daughter.
Yes.
It's delightful. And the bar is just having like a good time. They're stomping and shouting and jumping around, and there's Howie just friggin' like sulking in the corner, being like, I hate everything about this.
It's so wonderful because even in that scene they're teasing him. They know already his background. They know that he's a Christian. They know that he's very uptight and repressed about sex and sexualization in that sense. So a song where they literally are just sort of very gaudily shouting about how much they would love to have sex with the landlord's daughter is just fantastic. It's almost like they're teasing him. It's almost like they're saying, we know you don't like this, but here you go.
Right. While he's staying at the Green Man Inn, Howie notices a series of photographs that celebrate the annual harvest, each one featuring a young girl as the May Queen. But the photo of the most recent celebration is missing. It's extremely suspicious. They could have done a much better job of hiding this. But of course, they want him to actually find it, as we learn later. But the landlord he just brushes it off. He says that it's broken. And Howie is like, I don't believe you, but I can't really do anything about it.
Also should point out at this point, the landlord was played by Lindsay Kemp, who is a very famous performance actor in the UK. He's been in multiple British films, but probably his most recognisable thing was that he taught David Bowie and Kate Bush how to physically act and how to do mime.
Wow.
So he's a very, very well-respected man here playing the barman in The Wicker Man.
Well, I think he's really good in it. It's a small role, but he has a lot of physicality to him. He's kind of like leering, and he does a lot with a little.
Oh, absolutely. He's got this very nice kind of Cheshire Cat aspect to him almost, in the sense of he sits there and just plays gently with Howie. He doesn't actually get like full blown involved in the same way that Britt Ekland's character does, or Lord Summerisle, or the rest of the villagers, but he just kind of gently picks at him throughout the film whenever he has any engagement with him. Just little nuggets of things that make you go, hey, he's playing with him.
He feels the most like a spider, just like hanging in the web, waiting for him to land. It's great. It's really great. And Howie walks around. He sees a bunch of them doing pagan stuff, having sex in a field, weeping naked on a tombstone.
Typical Sunday night.
Reportedly, that is the woman who was also the body double for Britt Ekland. So,
wow.
There you go.
I've learned something new.
There you go. Hey.
I'll tell you that.
We did it.
Yeah.
He's shocked to see Christopher Lee, as Lord of Summerisle, although he doesn't know that yet, presenting a young man to Willow to take his virginity, and while she does that, Lee just hangs out in the garden and recites a poem while Howie prays. And you really get this sort of the movie is sort of represented in this moment where you see Howie sort of trying to resist and stand against these very, very pagan influences of nature and sex and the way that life sort of comes together in that way. It's a really powerful scene, I think, and it's a nice poem that Christopher Lee does as well.
Absolutely. In many senses, it's the very formal setting of battle lines, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's the moment where you realise, okay, this is side A and side B, and this is how they're going to interact with each other throughout the film. And in all other cuts apart from the final cut and the director's cut, this entire sequence is missing. So the theatrical cut, which was the most common one in the UK for the best part of 30 years, from the moment that Howie sees the woman crying on the gravestone right the way through to the next day,
wow,
all of that is just gone. So you don't get the Christopher Lee speech, you don't get the setting of battle lines, completely messes with the pacing.
Yeah.
In a very fundamental way. But seeing it back in the final cut is just beautiful. It's really nice, and he's got that very almost enlightening quality about him, Christopher Lee, as when he's reciting that poem. It's kind of like he's almost musing with himself about the sort of the nature of existence and how things sort of go forth from there.
Yeah, absolutely. He talks about how he thinks that he could turn and live with the animals, and how none of them are really that conscious of what's happening, but it also means that they're not unhappy. And it's just a very interesting poem. The next day, Willow directs him to the school where he sees children included as part of a May Day celebration leading up to May Day, including teaching children of the phallic association of the maypole, which, again, sort of shocks his very rigid sensibilities.
Absolutely, and it's also that similar scene features the oldest schoolgirl in the world. I don't know if you noticed, it's pretty hard to avoid, but there's clearly a 38-year-old woman sat amongst the girls in the girls' school, which I don't know why she's there. Look, I don't know whether they just assumed it was fine, or...
It's not nice to comment on a lady's age.
She does look significantly older, though. It's impossible not to see it. And the fact that she keeps a beetle in a desk that just goes round and round. If she is genuinely a age schoolgirl, I reservedly apologise, but I genuinely just think that they went around the island after they found out they were one person short that day and went, she'll do, get her. She was going shopping that week, but... I
agree. I think it's very funny, and... It's just they were like, shit, none of these kids can actually act.
Pretty much.
But he tells the teacher that he disapproves, and he asks the girls if they know Rowan, but they all say no. But there's one empty desk in the middle of everything, and obviously it sticks out. Like, it's so obtrusive. It's like right in the middle. And he goes to check it out, and there's a beetle tied to a nail. And this woman, creepily metaphors at him. She literally does a metaphor at him about how he's the beetle and he's so stuck in his ways that he'll self-destruct, basically, is what it boils down to.
And it's another one of those few incredibly surreal moments in this film. One of the things that, if you've never seen this film before, that you probably need to be made aware of very clearly, is there are moments in this film where things kind of just happen, and they probably do have links back to paganism, but there are just moments where you will see something very surreal. There's a notable one that's a little bit later in the film where a woman is breastfeeding a child while holding an egg.
So I actually, when I saw that, I went and did some research, and yeah, that does have some connection to paganism in that it's a fertility thing that she's doing where she wants to have another child. And so this is sort of a ritual to become pregnant again.
Oh,
so
good.
There you go.
Yeah, but there are these moments that, unless you have that context, which in 1972, I imagine, unless you went to a library 1973 and went to a library and really, really booked up on paganism, you probably wouldn't know why they were in the film. Which I think on the one hand is a really nice touch because, like you say, it does kind of incredibly increase the world building of this universe that Howie's kind of entered.
Yeah.
While at the same time just disorienting the audience a bit and never quite making them sure what's really important, what's really going to have value later in the film, and what's just there to mess with him.
Right. It really puts you in his shoes as well. You get to experience his disorientation.
Absolutely.
He is creeped out by this beetle, obviously. I mean, it's super creepy.
Yeah, it's really unsettling.
And he demands to see the school registry. And the teacher is like, show me a search warrant, pig. And he forces her out of the way. All cops are bastards. He executes this search illegally. But lo and behold, there is Rowan Morrison's name on the registry. The teacher pulls him outside, and she's like, okay, guess what? She is actually dead, but we don't say that here. We just kind of return to the life force. And she tells him where Rowan is buried. And he goes to check on the records. And again, coerces them from the woman in charge. He's a real bad police officer here.
He is. He turns up and he says, I want to see the records. And the record holder goes, no. And he goes, if you don't, I'm going to arrest you right now and you'll be spending the rest of your time on the mainland, to understand. At which point she goes, fine.
Yeah,
it's just,
right.
Yeah.
Howie,
which
you
I
son
think
of a bitch.
Yeah, basically, he takes no nonsense. I mean, he does break in and enter him without a warrant as well later in the film. Multiple times, in fact.
This whole court case would get thrown out.
Yeah. Best episode of Law and Order ever.
But he does check the records when she gives them to him, and there's no record of Rowan's death, and everyone just kind of shrugs, and they're like, take it or leave it, buddy. And so he takes a carriage ride, and it's very funny to see him kind of trying to look stern in this carriage as it like takes him on a lovely ride through nature.
As the horses are sort of clip-clopping past cherry blossoms and nice trees, and he's sort of got his war face on, and you're just like, nah.
And he passes a group of ladies doing a fertility ritual in the middle of a Stonehenge style thing. And he finally arrives at Lord Summerisle's castle. And it's very interesting to see this sort of dichotomy between the two of them, because obviously Howie, as a Christian, has been talking all along about how heathenistic and barbaric the pagans are. But in this scene, it's very easy to see that Summerisle is the reasonable and calm one, while Howie is all agitated and aggressive. And it does really sort of ask you, like, well, who is sort of being more barbaric here? It's a very interesting relationship that the two of them have.
Oh, yes, they're constantly sparring with each other over the exact intricacies of each other's religion. And I think Schaefer's sort of writing technique was to kind of create an atmosphere of we're not so different, you and I.
Classic.
Which, surprisingly, that line isn't in the film, which I'm very, very shocked about.
I wish it was.
Seems like an obvious. Oh yeah, I could just see a Christopher Lee coming out with that straight away. But no, I really do like how Christopher Lee really, as Lord Summerisle, really challenges Howie on his beliefs. Strangely, they only focus on the contrast between paganism and Christianity, but I suppose it's applicable to all religions, really, when you boil it down to its barest elements.
Right.
But I do love just that constant sniping at each other, just those little jibes, little lukes that they give each other throughout that scene. It was arguably, actually, funnily enough, that sequence that Christopher Lee was the most unhappy with the final edit, because apparently about that sequence should have been about 10 to 15 minutes longer. I can't see how much mileage they would have pulled out of that, but apparently at least 7 or 8 minutes of that of deleted footage was just Lord Summerisle explaining the full history of the island, which Robin Hardy cut because he said that it was too wordy. Which I believe it. I could believe it. Yeah. I could believe it. But yeah, that was the only thing that he was really still unhappy about, was that he didn't get his full grand sort of monologue. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's one of my favourite scenes in the film, just because of how bristly the pair are with each other.
Yeah.
And then of course it all builds to that wonderful sequence just after Lord Summerisle has explained the history of the island to Howie, where he sort of very borderly bellows, "They brought you up to be a pagan!" And he turns around and just gives that little wry smile as if to say, "Yeah, I got you. That's it. I've done it now. You're where I want you."
Yeah, it is really great. And I mean, he is getting these sick burns in. He's like, Jesus had his chance.
Yeah. And in a certain parliament, he blew it.
Yeah. They're just clashing over and over again. And as you say, he reveals the history of Summerisle, that he is the grandson of a Victorian agronomist, which is someone who uses the science and technology of producing and using plants in agriculture for food, fuel, fiber, and land restoration. So there you go, folks.
The more you know.
Yeah. Summerisle also explains that his grandfather developed strains of fruit trees that would prosper in Scotland's climate, hitherto thought impossible, and encouraged the belief that old gods would use the new strains to bring prosperity to the island. And over the next several generations, the island's inhabitants, including Summerisle's, the grandpappy Summerisle's child, and also current Christopher Lee Summerisle, also embraced the pagan religion fully, actually coming to believe in it, or at least claiming to. Howie is disgusted, and it boils over, and he asks finally for permission to exhume the body, which is granted, and he goes to dig it up, and lo and behold, there is a hair in the coffin.
Which is just great. And I also, at this point, I need to point out the grave digger who works in the cemetery is just fantastically whimsical in his performance. Just he could not give a crap about what Howie is there to do. He's literally just playing with him, but in the most wonderful, over-the-top way. Like when Howie first discovers the gravesite, and he's got a tree with a naval cord wrapped around it, and the gravedigger just comes up and goes, "Oh yes, well where else would it be?"
Right.
And it's like, of course, obviously. And the hair bit as well. When they actually find the hair in the casket for the first time, the first thing he does is just turns and laughs at him, as if again, like he didn't know that was the case. It's just great. He's fantastic in this.
I agree. And he confronts Summerisle and the teacher, who is now there as well, with the hair body. And he's all disheveled and frazzled. And basically, they tell him to buzz off and get to detecting if you want answers.
Yes.
Which I thought was just so funny. That he's like, "You're the detective, not me. Fuck off, guy."
I really love the response that they give when the hair gets flung at them, which was basically Howie says something along the lines of, "And what do you think you're playing at?" At which point they turn around and basically, "Well, I would say that it's a pretty nice transmutation."
Yeah.
As if to completely just go out, because they're obviously already aware of what Howie is going to find. They've planned all of this. So the idea that they just literally just keep that pressurized steam coming, they really are not giving him a break. They just really just want him to really suffer through this entire experience. I find is just wonderful.
Yeah, and he sure is. He sure is suffering through it. He accuses them of killing her in some pagan ritual and is determined to find proof. So he heads back into town. He finds the missing harvest photograph and he develops it. And it has Rowan standing amidst a failed crop. And this solidifies his suspicions. But he also remembers that Summerisle had ominously alluded to the May Day celebrations tomorrow, and he considers that she may not be dead just yet.
Absolutely. We can also add breaking and entering to his list of crimes against police, because he broke into the chemist's shop to develop the photos.
He sure did.
There was another point as well earlier in the film where he asked the chemist whether he still had the photos, and the chemist said he definitely didn't. So he's, I don't know whether it counts as stealing as well, because he technically took the prints without asking.
Yeah.
But Howie is a bad cop.
Yeah, he's at any means sort of guy.
Yeah. He doesn't go by the book, but damn it, he gets results.
Well, does he?
Well,
he gets a result, certainly.
But not necessarily the one he wants.
No, certainly not.
No.
He tries to go to sleep, but Willow and the band are working in conjunction to prevent that. With music downstairs, she's banging on the wall and she's singing, and it turns into this magic seduction dance. And this is where the butt double was implemented. And he has to resist through much tribulation and is sweaty as hell.
Oh yeah, he's
side of that wall.
I have never seen a man be as moist as that.
No, nor I.
Very sweaty man. Very sweaty man.
And he passes out, only to be awoken the next day by Willow coming in. And she mentions that he should have come over and that she was inviting him. And he says that it's against his religion to have sex outside of marriage, which seals his fate. If he had gone to her room that night, it would have ruined their whole plan.
Yeah, he probably would have been allowed to just clear off, and they might have either killed him just to keep him quiet so that he didn't come back with a load of police officers to come and investigate this weird, creepy
or just
pagan
been like,
island.
Here's Rowan. You found her.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Yeah, you can leave now. Please don't look at our giant man.
Yeah, ignore the Wicker Man.
That's a question, right? And you've just actually caused me to have a bit of a continuity problem here. He had a seaplane. He flew over the island. You wouldn't be able to build a giant Wicker Man in like 2 days. It'd take longer than that. They would have had to have been prepared.
Maybe he didn't know what it was for.
Maybe they put it on a side of the island that planes don't land in. That's the only...
It was in that cave.
Yeah, it was in the cave all along. But yeah, no, I love the idea of basically sex being the one thing that could have actually saved him. And he,
very counter to a lot of horror movies, in fact.
Exactly. Well, I mean, Scream famously, sex equals death.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He reads into the May Day rituals, and it again confirms his thoughts, saying that Rowan isn't dead, but she's due to be sacrificed for the harvest. He realizes that he's out of his depth. He goes to go back to the seaplane and get back up, only to discover that it is no longer functional, preventing him from leaving, and everyone... This is one of those surreal moments where it is just truly terrifying. Everyone pops up with these freaky masks to stare at him while he's trying to get this plane going. It is really scary.
I love those masks. I really want to get one because they're almost sort of bordering hyper-realistic in the sense that they've got all that real fur on and the eyes are just the right, everything's just the right sort of size and ratio. I know that there's a British band called Goldfrapp that did quite a lot of work in the early mid-2000s. They did an album called Seventh Tree that was very heavily inspired by the artwork of the Wicker Man, and those masks in particular were one of those things that really sort of pushed them musically into that sort of folky area. But yeah, no, those masks are absolutely gorgeous. I would love it, particularly the hair one. It's the first mask that pops up when Howie's in the seaplane. It looks great. Yeah. It's really, really unsettling, but in one of the best possible ways.
Absolutely. And he continues to investigate because he's like, all right, it's just me. I'm on my own here. He pleads with Miss Morrison. He's like, I know. How can you do this to your daughter? And Miss Morrison tells him to butt out.
Yes. Is that... No, I get these scenes mixed up because they do get moved around. Is that the same scene where she puts a frog in a little girl's mouth to steal her bad throat?
Yes, it is. I believe...
Yeah.
That might be a little earlier. No, this is it. This is the one.
Yeah. Because that's another one of those... Again, it's based on pagan traditions and beliefs, but at the exact same time, to watch it in 1973 as part of a sort of modern thing is quite unsettling. Just the idea that you take this little girl and shove a frog in her mouth and be like, yep, he's got your bad throat now.
Yeah, listen to him croak.
Yeah, it's just really weird imagery, but it's a total vibe I can get behind.
Hell yeah. He, in a rage, inspects every house.
Yes, and a boat at one point.
Yeah, but he finds nothing.
Apart from that girl in the wardrobe.
Right, yeah, he does find her, but unfortunately not Rowan. And he comes back to the inn for a whiskey and a nap, which I can respect that move.
Oh, yeah, I can live with that.
And Willow does like a little pagan spell to make him stay asleep, but it turns out Howie is just pretending all along. And he knocks out and ties up the innkeeper so he can steal his costume as a disguise. And he enters the parade as Punch the Fool. He's not very enthusiastic, though, and I just lose my shit when Christopher Lee is like, you call that dancing? Cut some cables, man.
Whenever me and my co-host on my show, Ben, are recording our commentaries, occasionally I will just turn to him and go, play the fool, it's what you're here for. You've been getting drunk again at your own bar.
It's a great scene, honestly.
Great. It's fantastic. And Lee at this point is just in full Summerisle swing. He is oozing charisma and is almost electric with his performance. He's giving it his all. And the costume that he's wearing in those scenes is just wonderful.
It's fun,
It's quite easily replicatable.
True.
Replicable? But yeah, he wears it best.
He sure does. And it's a fun parade. There's a lot going on. But one thing that I think is really great about this parade sequence is that it does get more and more frenetic, and you feel like you're coming to the climax of the movie. They do a really good job of sort of bringing that emotion to a head. You know, everyone is putting their head between the swords and everything, and you're like, is this part of it? Are they onto him? Is this going to kill Rowan? Is this going to kill him? And the sun is beating down and everything, and it's just a really, really great sequence.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I do quite like from a directorial standpoint is that during the festival sequences with the swords and with Mr. Punch being attacked by the ladies of the village, Hardy has chosen to focus more on close-ups than wides. The majority of the film is largely the head and shoulder shots, sort of mid-wides or wides. Whereas with the festivities section specifically, there's a lot more close-ups, particularly around the swords bit, which really puts you into the action and sort of adds to that freneticism, I suppose. It gives it that bit more of a momentum building. It makes it a lot more pacier and makes you much more invested in what's happening.
Yeah.
And it's also a bit more disorienting as well, really.
Absolutely, yeah. You're not. It's such a difference from the way that it's been presented prior to this moment that it does feel like a big shift, and it does kind of throw you off your feet. And the camera lingers on a woman in a hair mask, which we've already seen associated with Rowan several times. And they do a great job of making you, again, be in Howie's shoes, where the swords slice, and we and Howie are both like, oh my God, it's her. That was her all along. But it's Holly. It was just a trick. No problem.
Yeah, it's great. It's just the balls of this film at this point in time to sort of now start faking you out.
Yeah.
Because it's already disoriented you with, where is Rowan alive? Is Rowan even a person who exists?
Right.
And leading Howie down the track as well. So now that you're in the third act, and it is all to play for, and they do this a couple of times in the third act, they sort of make it look like that's going to be the end of the film, and then they pull the rug from under you, which makes the final reveal all the more satisfying, I find.
Yeah, definitely. They also go to make an offering to the god of the sea. This is, in my opinion, a toast that rivals even Big Trouble in Little China. He says, "O God of the sea, I offer you this ale as a libation, that you may bestow upon us the rich and diverse fruit of your kingdom." Great toast.
Brilliant. And the cine in it is just fantastic, where you get a low shot of Lee raising the axe up about to strike down, and then it cuts to a high shot of the barrels being rolled down, and ale is spilling everywhere, and the ocean's becoming all foamy, and it's just, and Lee again at this point is as Summerisle is well and truly off his rocker. He is going through, well, giving the appearance of being well and truly off his rocker, as we'll later find out. He is giving it his all. He's on all cylinders, and it's just beautiful. I completely understand why this was his favourite role.
Yeah. And now, a more dreadful sacrifice. And Howie leaps into action, because we see Rowan tied up there, and then he rushes up to cut her free, and he sucker punches the guard.
Yes, which is great. And a lot of people, right, when they talk about the Wicker Man, always talk about the scene in the 2006 remake where Nick Cage punches a bear.
No, he is a bear. Yeah,
he is a bear, and he punches a woman.
Right.
And for my money, Sergeant Howie lights out in some random thug who's holding Rowan is just so out of place in this film, which then leads into an even more surreal film where it very quickly turns into like a 1970s cop show.
Yeah,
where you get the funk folk bass going on as they're
it's great. I love that score. It's so fun.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. It's one of those ones, right? And I always have this argument with Ben, because Ben is a big Wicker Man fan. He always says that it's absolutely perfect for the film. I always say it's the one bit that I always kind of sit there and go, I'm not sure, because it's such a sharp tonal change from what we've been going to, and I completely understand why it's there, and it works. I would never say that it's bad. It's just one of those ones where I kind of sit there and go, okay, this is where the film's going, all right.
They should have done it with a mandolin and a fiddle instead.
Yeah, get a bit of fiddle jive going in. I can live with that.
But yes, as you say, in the remake, Nick Cage he's wearing a bear costume instead of Punch, but he does get a punch in on a lady who is guarding. Okay.
Right, that's it. You win. I'm off.
But yeah, so they flee into the cave together, Rowan and Howie, and when they leave, they like kind of climb out through this little exit, and they find islanders just chilling there. A few of the islanders, including Summerisle and the teacher and everything. And Rowan returns willingly, and he's trapped by the cliffs and the cave, and it dawns on him and us at the same time that he's fucked, basically.
Yeah. One of my favourite lines in the film as well, and it inspired, I don't know whether you're aware of the BBC comedy The League of Gentlemen.
No.
No. There's the scene where Rowan finally sees Summerisle. She shouts over to him, "Did I do it well?"
Yeah.
And Lord Summerisle goes, "You did it beautifully!" And that sequence inspired an entire pair of characters that are very, very famous in England called Edward and Tubbs, who are in a series called The League of Gentlemen, which was very heavily inspired by The Wicker Man. That gives you an idea. It's a very dark comedy series.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's really good fun. If you like dark comedy, it's really, really good fun. But one of the catchphrases that Edward has whenever, because Edward and Tubbs run a local shop, and Edward sends Tubbs out to do missions in the city because they don't deal with local people. Local people are too weird for them.
Interesting.
So whenever Tubbs comes back from doing a job, Edward will always go, "You did it beautifully," and give her a big old kiss, and sort of he's very heavily influenced on Lord Summerisle as a character.
Nice.
But that bit always makes me smile, just because I always remember the comedy show that got me into that kind of weird dark humour.
I guess you could say that this is truly fertile ground.
Absolutely. Definitely.
Summerisle tells Howie that Rowan was never the intended sacrifice. Howie himself is. You fool! Truly. He fits their God's 4 requirements, which are that he came of his own free will, he has the power of a king by representing the law, he is a virgin, and he's a fool. He also, I think something really interesting, is that he also explains that Howie gets something out of this as well, which is that as a true believer, he gets this martyr's death. So not only will he get supposedly resurrected according to the rules of his religion, but he also gets to sit with the saints and the select. And it's like, well, Howie is... he's getting something out of it in his own mind. Like, Summerisle is not wrong. It does sort of present this interesting idea of like, hey, this is a win-win for everyone here.
Yeah, well, this is it. He's posing the idea to Howie that not only will he gain from it, but the islanders will also gain from it too.
Right.
Howie, from his perspective, this is his worst possible nightmare because he's now completely abandoned, and it's only his sort of stern determination and faithfulness to his religion that's kind of keeping him on an even keel from just freaking out, basically, at this point.
Yeah.
And as the conversations between Summerisle and Edward Woodward's character go on, he very quickly reveals that Summerisle is kind of doing a last roll of the dice with all of this, and that he's only managed to keep the villagers on side with this being the sort of end solution, which again is really nice because you've got that sort of multiple levels of sort of awareness. So you've got the villagers who aren't aware of Summerisle's ultimate plan, but knows that he needs to get Howie out of the way in order to try and keep the peace for at least another 12 months.
Right.
You've got Howie who's desperately trying to convince the villagers that, killing him won't bring back their damned apples. And then you've got the villagers who are just sort of caught between it, who've been raised as pagans, who, much like Howie, are very stubborn to the point that they do not want to change what, for them at least, is their religion, is their fundamental, is their one and only beginning and end.
Right.
So it's nice to have all three of those kind of running narratives kind of overlapping each other, and as an audience member, again, on rewatch, you very much pick up all of these very subtle, nice little bits where you kind of realise that everybody's kind of operating on different levels.
I agree. Howie is in this, like you say, he's getting really angry. He warns them that the fruits, the trees are failing permanently, your damned apples. and that the villagers will turn on Summerisle and sacrifice him next summer when the next harvest fails as well. But Summerisle insists that the sacrifice of the willing, king-like virgin fool will be accepted and that the next harvest will not fail. Now, I don't know much about plant husbandry and fruit strain development, and frankly, I didn't have the time or energy to do a ton of research into figuring out whether it was reasonable that these trees would fail or not. But I will say that the what if creates a great tension and a ticking clock in your head that this is really only a temporary solution to placate the villagers, and that if it does fail again next summer, what does that mean for this island? I think it's really, that one line does a lot to really create sort of a runway for this movie in your mind.
Absolutely. It's one of those ones where the choices that are presented to the villagers is to basically accept blind faith as a means to an end. And if somebody has to die in order to placate the gods and ensure that harvest is fruitful, then the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Right.
Which is wonderful because, like you say, it creates that ticking clock. It creates that moment where you realise that Howie is in a position where he's got to either try and talk himself out of being sacrificed, or it's just going to happen, and there's nothing he can do to sort of prevent it. He's now in a helpless situation. You know, even his religion is actually now more of a detriment to him than a benefit.
Yeah.
Which is wonderful, because it's just sort of that long-term and short-term pessimism being worked in together. You've got Howie's sort of short-term pessimism of knowing, well, this is it, you know, crikey, I've buggered it this time, I'm going to have to be burnt. But then the long-term pessimism of, well, this isn't going to restore the apples, this isn't going to do anything, this is just killing somebody. So realistically, the island is probably going to just collapse industrially. You know, a lot of people are probably going to die horribly and needlessly, because Lord Summerisle wanted to maintain another 12 months of the good life, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like if there was a pandemic happening and you downplayed it because you, quote-unquote, didn't want to cause a panic, and instead that resulted in the death of thousands and thousands of people needlessly. It's sort of like that.
George, I know we don't have webcams on, but I can almost feel you burning through my screen, staring down the barrel of the camera at this point. Yeah, it's frighteningly accurate. In fact, you know what? I'll tell you this now. When all of this first kicked off in the real world, sorry to break into the real world here, when all this kicked off, in the first instance, I turned to Ben, who I keep in regular contact with, and I said to him, this is basically going the way of the Wicker Man. We've got a president and a prime minister who are both basically saying, trust us, and we'll make sure nothing happens, when we know that everything is going to happen.
Yeah.
And yeah, you know,
and it's happening.
I'm sure that, I'm sure the Wicker Trump is looking really nice right about now. What, you guys got 2 months left? So.
Oh yeah, exactly. But to bring it back to the actual movie, the villagers, they force Howie inside this giant Wicker Man statue, along with various animals, and they set it ablaze and surround it, singing "Sumer is a coomin' in." Super creepy. This is the like plastered smiles on everyone's face as they like swing their arms back and forth is just so effective.
It's the determination in the swings as well. It's not like they're just going with the flow. There is force behind those arms going. They truly believe this is the beginning of a beautiful and bountiful utopia in the making.
Yeah.
It was that scene, funnily enough, as well, that nearly got the entire production kicked out of the village they were filming in, because the villagers who lived in the town that they were filming the Wicker Man burning in were convinced that they were going to burn a goat that was a local mascot.
Wow.
And it was only when, I think it was Robin Hardy and Anthony Schaefer basically went down to the town and had a town hall meeting with everybody where they promised they would not burn the beloved mascot goat, that they sort of calmed down a bit and let them keep filming. So very briefly, it did actually turn into a slightly real-world Wicker Man.
Well, I'm glad that he was able to convince them. Reportedly, on his off days, Edward Woodward was repeatedly asked if he wanted to go to the spot where the climax was to be shot so he could see the Wicker Man structure, but every time he declined, preferring to see it for the first time when the scene was shot, which means that as Woodward sees the structure getting dragged over the hill as Howie, his iconic cry of "Oh God, oh Jesus Christ" was it's realistic. It's this in-character moment for him where he is genuinely seeing it for the first time. As the camera was like moved around to film the scene, Woodward asked Hardy if he was actually going to be put in the Wicker Man, and Hardy was like, "Yeah, man, you're going in there." He was carried up the steps to the structure's midsection by Ian Campbell, and Woodward reportedly was like, "Don't drop me. Don't you dare drop me." And Campbell had to just like laugh him off and be like, "Don't worry, I won't." But when the actual burning scene was happening, he said that this was he had been acting for 6 decades and that he had never been more scared than when he was inside the Wicker Man as it burned. Understandably so.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just the franticness of the production and the fact that so many things weren't quite 100%. Like, if it was an entirely smooth production where everybody was happy and it wasn't the middle of autumn and in Scotland and everything was miserable and things kind of hadn't landed 100% right with getting stuff done, I'd probably be a bit more comfortable with being burnt in the giant Wicker Man. As it stands, yeah, I'd probably be sort of collar tugging at this point, just in case anything didn't quite go right.
Right.
But yeah, they had to really, really be precise with that shoot because they built 2 Wicker Men originally. One of them is the one that was used on screen and was burnt on screen. They did have a backup just in the off chance that it didn't work. That Wicker Man ended up going to Cannes. That was the thing that Roger Corman saw that really sold him on the idea of buying the film. I don't know what happened to the second Wicker Man. The remnants of the first Wicker Man, you can still go to them. The pyre that's built... The pyre structure that the Wicker Man was built on is still there, so you can go up to it. I think it's a lot more reduced now than it was because fans have regularly made pilgrimages to all of the key locations of the film, and in particular that pyre. So there's large juts of wood that are now missing from it. But yeah, the sort of scorch marks and the sort of base of the pyre is still there. You can still go to it to this day. Which is really neat.
It is really neat. And, I mean, that sort of... The fact that it is still there, it's left such an indelible impact on the ground in which it was filmed, I think sort of ties into the sort of nature of paganism and everything, which I think is interesting. And basically, Woodward said that the terror forced him to act his socks off. And that's exactly what he does, because inside the Wicker Man, a terrified Howie recites Psalm 23 and prays to God before cursing the islanders as he and the animals inside burn to death. The head of the Wicker Man collapses in flames, revealing the setting sun. It's great.
Which is a beautiful shot.
Yeah.
And it took them ages to get it set up. They were very, very worried because they knew the shot they wanted, which was the shot that they ultimately managed to get. But obviously, because the Wicker Man wasn't burning evenly, they couldn't 100% predict which way it was going to fall. So they had to get the focus right as close as possible as they could, because if it fell the opposite direction to the direction they were planning it to fall, it would go blurry and the shot wouldn't work. But luckily, just at the last minute, they managed to pull it off. But it took hours, apparently, to set up that finishing shot where the head sort of drops down to reveal the sunset. The
alternate ending that I mentioned earlier that the studio had wanted was a sudden rain puts out the flames of the Wicker Man and spares Howie's life. And I think that it's really, what a weird idea to be like, this whole thing, we're throwing it out, God is real, he saves him, and he just gets this nice happy ending for Howie. I mean, I have a hunch which way you'll fall, but I assume that you like it the way it is and not this more traditional happy ending way.
Yeah, I think the original ending is the best. But that being said, I don't know whether you found any of this in your research. Did you hear about the proposed Wicker Man sequel?
I did. In fact, I am about to talk about it, my friend.
Ah, very well. I was going to say, because that then takes it to the next level.
Yes.
If you're talking about taking leaps of faith on ending a series,
right?
The proposed sequel to this, it just takes the Wicker Man and goes out the bloody window.
It sure does. But yeah, basically, so this movie has had a long-lasting impact with its filmic influences seen in movies like Hot Fuzz and Midsommar. It even also gives its name to an annual music and arts festival held where the movie was shot in Dumfries and Galloway in Scotland since 2004. And at the end of the festival, they burn a Wicker Man sculpture there, again, as a sacrifice to the festival gods. About this sequel, so in 1989... Schaefer wrote a 30-page film script treatment entitled The Loathsome Lambton Worm, a direct sequel to The Wicker Man for producer Lance Reynolds. The idea is that this would have been more fantastical in subject matter than the original film and relied more heavily on special effects, but it would have began immediately after the ending of the first film, where Neil Howie is rescued by a bunch of police officers from the mainland who just show up in time to save him.
I joked, when I first heard about this film, I joked that the sequel would open with Howie falling out of the Wicker Man that was still on fire. Some of the wood gave way and he just dropped out. So the villagers just picked him up and threw him back in again. Film over.
Yeah, right? But I'll be honest, it obviously it doesn't feel like it would fit in with the tone of The Wicker Man, but
absolutely not.
But the idea of the loathsome Lambton worm, I think, is kind of interesting in that how he sets out to bring Lord Summerisle and his pagan followers to justice, but becomes embroiled in a series of challenges which pits the old gods against his own Christian faith, with the script culminating in a climactic battle between Howie and a fire-breathing dragon, the titular Lambton worm.
Yes. Which is just, I don't know what he was thinking when he wrote the script for this.
Truly wild.
Robin Hardy refused to read it. Schaefer basically turned up and went, I've written this sequel. He just went, no. Edward Woodward received a copy of it, but said he'd never read it and wouldn't want to read it. Christopher Lee, I think, changed addresses just to avoid receiving a copy of it. The idea, I mean, in my mind, I'm imagining sort of a cross between sort of Lord of the Rings and like maybe a Hot Fuzz vibe.
Yeah.
A bit of First Blood thrown in as well, because by this point, you know, Howie's on the run and he's got the villagers coming after him still who need their sacrifice.
He really is putting on the bandana this time.
Yeah, he's back and he's pissed off more than he was in the first film.
And he was already really pissed off.
Yeah. But just the idea of it, just the whole thing sounds absolutely... It sounds like the kind of thing that I would talk about on my show, which is saying something. So
it's true.
Yeah.
But it was never produced, like you say, but the treatment, if someone wants to check it out, there are two ways that you can do this. It was published, complete with illustrations, in the companion book Inside the Wicker Man, so you can check it out in there. Or there's a fan-made full-cast audio drama adaptation of the Loathsome Lambton Worm, released this very year in 2020. So you can go and find that if you're so inclined.
Did not know about that, and I know what I'm going to be doing this evening.
Well,
Thank
you. There you go. And of course, there's also, like we said, the famous Nick Cage remake. Calling it imperfect is generous.
The bit where Howie, in air quotes, goes to a car to check on a girl in the back seat and a tankard explodes, I think is the one, immediately set the tone for me on whether I was going to like this film or not. I like it. I'm not somebody who absolutely hates it, but I like it for all the wrong reasons. I'm one of these people who goes, yeah, let's do The Room and The Wicker Man. That'll be great.
There you go. I think it's funny that, so like I say, I don't think it's a perfect movie, but even that is less generous than Hardy, who, quote, had concerns.
Yes.
Which feels very British to me.
That's it. To translate that into UK, that basically means, oh dear. Oh, no. I did not get paid enough to sign this off. What on earth have you done?
Yes.
So, yeah.
But all of that just lends credence to the idea that this movie could not be recaptured, and it is, in fact, the best horror movie ever made. So now that we've reached the end of the podcast, Dan, I'll let you start off, and we'll sum up exactly why that is the case.
I think that The Wicker Man is the best horror movie ever made for a multitude of reasons. Not only is it elevated horror, which is a personal preference of my own, you have a multi-layered, multifaceted script that is just brimming with ideas and energy and vibrance. It's completely tonally set. You have some gorgeous direction, which is just visually eye-popping, and in a sea of beiges and oranges that was 70s cinema, this film is one of the most colourful films you will probably see of that decade. On the cast front, you have a superb variety of performances, ranging from the sort of closed and quiet to the bombastic and over the top. Add in a fantastic folk soundtrack that is worth owning on multiple formats just for the sake of it, which has a beautiful tone and a rich and vibrant sort of construct, taking older elements and renewing them into modern, for the 70s, folk sing-alongs. And it's one of those films that just kind of stands the test of time. Its core elements could be easily transplanted into modern cinema, and probably in some cases has been transplanted into modern cinema very successfully. Since its release, it's been screened in stereoscopic 3D, it's been screened in smell-o-vision, which I love that. There was a sing-along version. Some screenings have bits where you can throw things at the screen and shout like Rocky Horror. It's been shown in cathedrals. It's a very, very highly regarded film that I think rightfully earns the title of the Citizen Kane of horror.
There you go. Couldn't have said it better myself, but I'm going to try. To me, this is the best horror movie ever made because, one, it's just absolutely gorgeous. It just looks so great. Like we talked about, the fact that they managed to do it in a time when the landscape didn't actually even look that way, and it managed just to feel natural and beautiful, is really spectacular. But the script, which is great, and the way it's directed, which is great, are elevated by the performances in this movie, which I think are really just spectacular, especially Woodward and Lee. It does such a great job of capturing the feel of a mystery, and because we are with Howie and so empathetic to him in terms of we're getting information at the same time that he is, it always feels like Howie is one step behind. And we also are so interested in the pursuit of this case because we are also one step behind. And as it becomes a little more clear and we see that his dogged pursuit of this mystery will be self-destructive, the dread of that starts to grow as we watch it lead to its inevitable conclusion. And I just think that they execute it so well. It never feels like it overstays its welcome, even though this is the version with more footage put back in. Christopher Lee is just doing so great. Like you say, I understand why this is his favorite performance because he does such a great job with it. And the music rules, man. Friggin' corn rigs and barley rigs, and corn rigs are Bonnie. And so is this movie. So there you go.
Absolutely. Couldn't have put it better myself.
Dan, this was so much fun. I really want to encourage people to check out your channel, so please tell people where they can find you on social, on YouTube, all that jazz.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a fantastic way to spend my Saturday evening. It's been beautiful. So cheers again. You can reach me on YouTube at TYTD Reviews. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram under the same name. And I have a website which is www.tytdreviews.com. We do new reviews every Friday. We do random blog posts as and when, and we also have a series called The Comedy Dining Experience where we do feature commentaries over more mainstream films and classics.
Great. Go check all those things out. Dan's a great guy, super funny. His reviews are super insightful. I really encourage you to subscribe to his channel. As far as my plugs, you can find me on Twitter at littlehorrorphl. You can find me on the internet at www.littlehorrorphl.com. You can find me on Facebook at Little Horror PHL. In fact, Little Horror PHL is pretty much your key to everything Best Little Horror House in Philly. There's even a Patreon if you decide that you want more Best Little Horror House in Philly at patreon.com/Little Horror PHL, where we're doing bonus episodes, commentaries, riff tracks, style things, and ad-free and early episodes as well. So lots of good stuff going on there. And leave a rating and a review if you feel like doing that. It helps a lot. I say it every week. Never actually happens, but maybe one day someone will leave a rating and a review. Yeah, do that on iTunes. And that's pretty much it for me. So thanks again, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Take care.